Welcome to A Patch of the Blue. First ever interview for the show today. I'm so excited. No dilly-dallying. We're just going to get right into it. This person is the one who inspired me to get started on this podcast in the first place. We made our own little podcast that will probably never see the light of day, and that is perfectly okay. But I continue to admire him and look up to him as he is someone who is so well-rounded and so genuine. It brings me such joy just to be around him. I've had the pleasure of calling him a friend since the 7th grade when he moved back to the United States from India, and now he continues down his own journey, going through medical school to pursue his goal of becoming a doctor, and I'm so proud to call this man a friend. Without further ado, Sidharth Anand. I know you. I know how I would describe you. You ever got like that interview question where somebody says, how would your friends describe you? I know the terms I would use to describe you.
Okay.
What's the one term you don't think people think about you that you think about yourself, and how you would describe yourself?
Oh, that is tough. You came up straight out of the gate with that one.
I have to.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I think that like for me personally, and this is something that I've like sort of evolved over the past few years. I think of myself sometimes as not an intense person. Like I think a lot of people will describe me as the way I would think, friendly, loyal, dedicated to sort of what you're passionate about, that kind of thing. But in terms of that one, I would say it's like chill. I don't think a lot of people think I'm super chill. I think a lot of people think I'm very intense, very emotional, very passionate, which is true. But I do think that I have like a very chill, low key side to me that doesn't get worked up at things, doesn't get angry at things. But people do see that I'm very passionate. But I like to think of myself as having a more reserved side, a more observant side. So yeah, I would say chill is something that like people think I'm cool. People will hang out with me. People are friends with me. But being chill is something that like I like to think of myself that a lot of people don't necessarily know.
How do you use that in your personal and professional life? Do you see it more in one aspect where maybe in the professional setting, being chill and level headed keeps you on an even playing field and kind of advancing in your career? Do you see it in your personal life where you use that to help build a relationship where you can kind of see everyone's perspective? Like what's your main focus there?
Yeah. I would say I think I use it more personally. I would say if my passion, it's more important for me personally that my passion, my dedication, my sort of like, kind of taking feedback, the fact that I'm very receptive, I listen, is much more important in my professional than in my personal. My personal, I try to bring out that sort of being more chill, being more observant, because I do think that a lot of people rely on me and come to me, which I love for just talking about things, for telling me things, for just to have a good conversation. Like being a good friend and being a presence is something that I value a lot in my personal life. But I would say that sort of being chill and being more relaxed and sort of letting things play out, observing from afar, is more relevant and something I put conscious effort in my personal life rather than professional. If my intensity shows through in my professional life, I really don't mind.
It's interesting that you use that distinction right there when you said listening in the professional setting is more of a key skill as opposed to being chill. If I was to use one of the things to describe you, it's you're one of the best listeners that I know. And it's honest, and it's no secret that we're really good friends. So
Yeah.
when it comes to speaking with somebody and being very transparent, I know that I can be transparent with you because of how good of a listener you are, and I know you'll give me honest feedback. Is that something that you had to develop? How did that come to be? Were you always that way, or was that something you had to pick up as like a soft skill?
I would say it's something I had to pick up, and I credit my parents a lot with this. I think it's I don't know if it's necessarily a cultural thing or my family specifically, but as a kid and even kind of when I first moved to the country too, like I felt that I was very sort of vocal. I said what was on my head. I didn't sort of take a pause to listen. Like empathy is something that comes to me. I think naturally, like being able to sort of um, understand a person's scenario. Like I was always a kid, having grown up in India, like you witness a lot of poverty and a lot of struggles and issues that you are privileged. I was very privileged growing up to be in a reasonably well off family, have a home, have a driver, this and that, like basic luxuries being in India. And you go out onto the street, you go to a restaurant, you see families who are begging for food, selling little toys and things like that. You witness these things, and I was always the guy who my parents are, and most of the families we were with are a little bit more cynical, right? Because a lot of them tend to be fakes. A lot of them tend to be. So I've always been very trusting and very like able to see the good in people. But in terms of listening, holding a conversation, developing that sort of like interpersonal connection, I do think I had to work on it a little bit. My parents would sort of point out when I got into little things at school. When I don't know if you remember this incident back in middle school when I don't even know if you were in my team, but we were in Miss Outman's math class, and uh, there was I really don't remember if you were there. I know
I
Tanner
wasn't.
was.
I
I don't
wasn't.
know. I don't think you were there. But so I was. And this is just I'm like putting everybody on blast right now. But there was a situation where I just not realizing the fault in it would let people copy off my homework. I would do it obviously the day before, be responsible. Many of the other students wouldn't. They would come and they would cheat off of me. And there's a situation where we were in another class. There was a sub for that class, and he caught me handing the homework to someone, reported it to the math teacher. The math teacher catches me and tells me that you need to learn how to say no. Because that's something that doesn't come easy to you, I'm going to hold on to your homework. Every morning you come in, you do your homework, you drop it on the radiator, and you go to do the rest of your class, and you come back, you pick it up at the end of the day. And that was one of the things that slowly, like, there were incidents like that where my parents and people like Miss Outman and just people around me would make me realize that, like, there is a difference between being nice and being empathetic, and being a pushover, right? And that was something that I had to work on, is like being a good listener, but also being self-aware and sort of realizing like how the world works, and kind of developing that maturity. I don't know, that doesn't necessarily directly answer your question, but I would say all of those kind of came together. That, like, my natural thing was to see the good in people, and sort of not worry about the way I come across. But eventually, I had to work a lot on sort of myself, where I stand, general tact in conversation, and just like being intelligent about how you come across in conversations.
No, I think you definitely answered my question. And you went somewhere that I really wanted to ask you about because in all the years of our friendship, it you coming from India is something that I never knew a ton about. And I've always wanted to get your perspective. What what was your childhood like? What was the dynamic growing up in India? What was the family dynamic? And once you came here, what was the biggest shift for you that really transformed the path that you put yourself on?
That's a great question. I think it's a huge question because I mean, my childhood in India was a lot of things, but I'll focus on the transition first. I think that for me in India, I think the biggest thing that changed, like if you talk about immediately getting off the plane, first year at school, seventh grade, the biggest thing for me that was missing was comfort. And I think that that sounds more obvious than it was, but in the sense that I would say perceived comfort. As you know, I was born in the US, right? So when I went to India, I was always like, oh, I'm more American. My English is better. I have more of a connection to America. And I honestly felt that way all through my time in India. But by the end, when I moved, I realized how much India had grown on me and how much India had sort of like seeped into me. And a lot of that still stays. Like, if I sort of look the other direction, now looking back at India, I feel more connected to India because I live there and I grew up there, and I still feel connected to the US, but I've developed a lot of aspects in India that I didn't think I would have. So my childhood in India was great. I mean, I would say it's very normal for a childhood in India, but it was a lot of, like, I would say it's a lot more communal than I noticed the US being. Like, I really had to make an effort at friendships, and obviously, like, you and I became really close after school, right? We became close, and I hope we talk about this, but that freshman year prom, when both of us we went to prom after the first year of college, like, that's when we really became close. And I really felt that high school and middle school, I really had to work at being friends. Friendships and socialization came a lot easier to me in India, just because you all lived in the same place. We all lived in one big apartment complex. Even though we all went to different schools, the buses left at the same time. The buses came back around the same time. We'd all, play cricket or whatever it is in the center of our apartment. There was like a large courtyard there, and I was a kid. And, I would say personality wise, of course, this comes with time, but I really wasn't a great kid. I don't think, like,
Really?
yeah. And in the sense that, like, I would I would lie to my parents about like losing pencils, and there's a different kind of perception of what's bad and good in India. I've noticed that. Obviously here being bad in middle school, again, at least now, even to an extent when we were in middle school, was like, I don't know, drinking, like vaping, like skipping class, things like that. In India, it's a little bit more stricter than that. You're talking about a school where everybody goes in uniform, where everybody like, has to do the same thing. They strictly check your nails, they check your haircut. It's very, so when you're in that environment, being rebellious is things like untucking your shirt, not standing up when the teacher calls on you. Um, you know, Borrowing money when your parents tell you, oh, you can't eat from the school cafeteria today, borrowing money to go buy ice cream. So in that sense, I was a really bad kid. Like I would like go borrow money to like get ice cream all the time. I would, um, even just like talking, like making, again, this is getting crude and I apologize, but like making a dick joke, let's say, right? This is, getting more towards the, like, we don't consider that a big deal, but there, that's like a huge deal. If the teacher hears you, you could be expelled for that kind of shit. That's only a mild exaggeration. So growing up in that environment, like I felt that I had not a huge streak, but like a small rebellious streak. I often like I didn't have the closeness with my parents that I do now, and especially after coming to the U.S. and realizing like how uncomfortable I felt in situations where actual illegal things were going on. When like I didn't drink until I turned 21. I've never smoked. Like I was a very like I was just, I was scared to try those kinds of things. And like that came from a place of having done a small fraction of that back in India and getting caught for it, getting in trouble for it. And then coming here, I just became a super like honest, very like, I became a good kid, basically. And I think that was the big switch culturally coming to the US, is realizing like how different it was socially and how easy it was to slip. And I just became much more motivated about school, about academics, about my career, about being close to my family. And there was just this like inherent sense of fear, seems like the wrong word, but like responsibility, I guess, that switched when I came here. And a lot of that is like being exposed to people like you, who I saw like very close to your family, like knowing your dad, and that sense of responsibility and accountability that comes from yourself rather than being forced on you in India was a big difference. So being exposed to that and realizing you have to take care of yourself to like shape your career was a huge, I think, realization for me.
Wow, that was a really great answer.
Thanks. I know
And
there's a lot, but yeah, I'm happy to talk more about India. But I think that like sort of was where I was thinking with the transition coming over.
yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. And I think first and foremost, you you identifying as a rebellious kid and saying you were more of a bad kid. I'm of the personal belief that truly bad people never concern themselves as to whether or not they're bad or good.
Yeah.
I've always,
No, I.
yeah, I've always been of the belief that if you make that conscious effort in yourself to recognize that you have in your own mind shortcomings. I think even some of the shortcomings, like borrowing money for lunch, I think some kids would never think twice about that. But even something like that for you that you recognize as a shortcoming, that you put that thought in and attention and you chose to grow upon it, speaks to your character and speaks to your ability to reflect, which is such a crucial skill, I believe, in anybody growing up into the person that they want to be, is to look at who they were in the past, reflect upon it, and make the necessary changes to get to be the person that they want to be. So I applaud you for that.
Thank you.
You have mentioned comfort a lot of times, and I want to relate it back to what you said before. So something as small as letting people cheat off your homework. Do you think it's a situation of you allowed that to happen as a way to try to find comfort and let people try to come into your life as, okay, this is somebody who's going to provide me with a service and the transaction here is he's just looking for friendship?
Mhm.
Or was it more kindness was being taken as a weakness?
It's a good question. I would say eventually I came to see it as a weakness that, I did, I'll admit, like I'm of the firm belief that, people who are firmly secure in themselves and not, who don't want to do things for external validation are generally in the long term happier. Like I've noticed that, and that I could be wrong. And I feel like people often think they're doing things of their own volition, but many times they're either subconsciously or without realizing it, doing it for somebody else's validation. But I honestly, like, I don't know whether I realized it at the time, but I can say safely now that yes, I was doing it purely for the friendship. Like, I felt that, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, I'm a very helpful guy. Like, I will always do anything you ask me to do. Like, I won't shy away from sort of trying to help you first. Even if it makes me uncomfortable, I will first try to put you first. And that's something that, like, I've realized the sort of bad side, or not the more harmful side of it later in life, but at least in middle school, when you live in the shelter of your parents' home, when there's no consequence of things like that, personally, you feel like, oh, this person needs my help. I will feel guilty if I don't help them. I need to sort of, secure that friendship, if you will, and therefore this is my way to do that. So I think, ultimately, like, there was some guilt and some sort of, like, personal, I guess, responsibility there, but all in all, yeah, I think mostly it was just wanting to be a good friend.
I think you've succeeded at that. I'd say so myself.
Yeah, but I mean, but to be fair, like, obviously, I realized much later. It seems like a stupid realization that, like, you don't need to do things like that to be a good friend. Like, if people will only be friends with you for your homework or because of the service, as you said, that you provide, they're not really being a good friend, and that's something that comes with time, like that realization, and that's not something that I had early on. And yeah, I think that sort of the feeling, that sense of comfort, came from validation.
Yeah. I was doing an episode a little while back about a similar type of topic where I was talking about changing yourself.
Yeah.
And the act of changing yourself should be something that comes from within. And when you're changing yourself because you're looking for outside validation, whether it be you want to fit in with a certain crowd of people, you want to achieve a certain status, you want to achieve a certain level of wealth, that attention that you're going to receive, it might come, but it's going to be as quickly fleeting as it quickly came.
Yeah.
Once they take that service from you, whatever you're providing, in this case, it's your homework. Say further down the line, it's just your genuine attention and
Mhm.
providing people with attention. And once they get your attention, their attention, and we're all attention starved. It's the world that we live in now. But once somebody gets that attention, they feel they don't need it anymore. They're going to cut you off.
Mhm.
It's unfortunate, but I'm glad that you and I see the world the same way in that way, because I don't think a lot of people our age do.
No. No, and it's funny you bring that up, right? Because I think that attention is inherently different than something tangible. Because in many ways, friendship is built on attention, right? Like, think about it. Like, when you give attention to someone, you're sort of putting them. You're doing the same things we're doing now. You're listening. You're talking. But then you sort of only see that you're truly giving and not receiving only when it comes for one specific thing, right? Like, the best example of it is people who, and I'm seeing it a lot. You often see it in school, for example, like people who only used to talk to you if you were in class, for example,
Yep.
or people who you only used to talk to you if they knew you were, like, particularly good at something, like, and people who you would at a party or whatever wouldn't come up to you. Now, I would say that that doesn't happen often. Like, more often than not, like, if you like, especially later in college and now in med school, one thing I'm realizing is that, like, academics is not a transaction. It's not seen that way, but attention is something that, like, it can very quickly become a commodity. But you don't see it until later because it's often masked as the root of friendship. That friendship comes from giving attention to each other, right? And you think, oh, I'm just being a good friend, or he's just being a good friend, but then eventually you don't realize that you're sort of relying on someone. And I've been guilty of this too. You're sort of just relying on someone for the attention without actually trying to build a connection, or give that attention back.
Agreed. Attention is as close to uh, intangible drug as we can get. I think
Yeah.
so many, so many people, so many aspects of life are just built around the center idea of attention. It's social media, and
Yeah.
I've said it before with the show. I do the show for attention. I don't hide it. If I wanted to hide it, I would have kept it in my journal.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
one of the things I've said is journaling never really worked for me.
Yeah.
It was that keeping it closed off, forcing myself to write it out was never really working for me, keeping it closed off to myself. The idea that I can share this idea with somebody else, whether it's me just talking to the camera or talking with a friend, maybe someone who I meet because of this,
Mhm.
have their attention while doing that, or have the attention of a potential audience member to see if people just share the same ideas that I do.
Yeah.
Getting validation that way. Like, I'm not the only person who thinks this way. I'm not the only person who sees the world as, yeah, we have some of the wrong motivations sometimes. We're starved for attention instead of being starved for relationships. And I think that dichotomy really comes into play a lot. I definitely saw it more in high school than you do going throughout college. People are more, I don't want to say selfish once you start progressing your way through college and now you're in med school, but people start to formulate a sense of who they are,
Mhm.
and once they self identify, they kind of start to cut off any additional outside noise that they don't think would benefit them. So
Agreed. Yeah.
similar type of idea with attention, but it's more self promotion that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Going
Yeah.
back to high school, you had mentioned it. We became friends. You could argue by proximity. We just happened to be in the same math class. We
Yep.
hit it off. We became friends instantly. But like you said, we go not separate ways in high school, but we fit into different groups. And I see you in that space from a more outside lens than we did in middle school.
Mhm.
And you accomplished so much in that time. You were salutatorian of our graduating class, science research member, going to Tufts, everything that you could ever wish for in terms of academics, tennis team, band member. Am I correct on that? Or yeah, band member. Very well rounded. What promoted you to go that extra mile, to be that well rounded, to achieve such a high academic status? Was it a personal drive to achieve something greater than you thought you could, or was it external factors promoting you to be that way?
I would say it's actually, a bit of the first point. I don't really think it was external factors. I think to an extent, maybe like in the sense of, my parents pushing me to sort of do things, but then I realized that like there were certain things that like they would push me to that I just didn't enjoy because it felt too performative. So obviously everyone wants to resume build. Like there's an element of that in whatever. I'm not going to shy away from it. I'm not going to say, oh, everything was bad. But I wouldn't say that was always my first thought. Especially for things I was continual with. Like take science research, right? Like I'm in science now because of science research. But that was initially something that my parents pushed me towards. And they also pushed me towards robotics. I let go of robotics by my sophomore year of high school because I just wasn't passionate about it. So I would say, as I went on through high school, it was mostly the passion, but it was actually a more third kind of thing, which was just it was less of like having a personal drive to try and do as many things as possible. It was just more that I find a lot of things personally fulfilling. I'm not someone who can pick one passion and stick with it. Like I'm passionate about a lot of things. And that's just something that like at first I was like, oh my God, does this mean I'm stretching myself thin? And it didn't stop in college. In college, I was involved in 6 or 7 clubs all through my 4 years. But in high school, I think specifically, it was just more, yes, it was a personal drive, but I just found that like I thrive on doing what I want to do and like having all these different things going. I thrive on having multiple communities, about being on being friends with multiple people, on being ubiquitous with who I talk to. And we talked about attention just now, but like meeting all kinds of people, knowing all the teachers, like those are things that bring me genuine joy. Band, was something that like I could have given up after 2 years, but I just stuck with it. In fact, I quit my junior year because it didn't fit my schedule. And then I came back my senior year because I enjoyed it so much. So I would say it was more a genuine like interest in these things, and then internal factors. But at first, yes, there are obviously some external factors that motivated me towards certain things.
I think you might have just made at least several listeners jealous by saying that you found fulfillment at an early age, because
Yeah.
that is the hardest thing for some people to find, and they never find it because they never find that activity, they never find that endeavor that fuels them the way that they do. And you say that it comes from a lot of different avenues, and where I want to go with that is, do you think it's that way because you have an appreciation of the little things in life? Like you said, just meeting the people in the community, having a conversation with them, not the end goal of,
Mhm.
oh, I want to build this huge community and we're going to, I don't know, create this amazing robotics project. We're going to raise this much money for a nonprofit organization or something like that. We're going to do all these amazing things. It's just the journey of getting to be a part of those communities, getting to this stage in your life that you are now through the path that you took to work as hard as you did. Is
Yeah.
that what fuels you? Is it the journey or is it the end destination?
So you and I are both very spiritual people, right? We're both
Yes.
very religious, which is something we've talked about at length, and it's something we've known about each other for a while. And I think that like where I'm going with that, why I bring spirit and religion into this, is because I firmly believe that there is a purpose. Whatever that purpose is, I'm on it right now. I'm on that path to get there. In as I go through that, if I can continue to touch in with that sort of ultimate goal, I don't know what it is yet, but I know that it's there. And along the way, the fact that I'm allowed to sort of explore all these interests is like, it's as you said, like I think part of it is some people never find that fulfillment. The other part is some people just don't have the ability and don't have the access. I'm privileged to have the ability and the access. You can say, oh, it's because I'm passionate about these things because I sought it out. But I honestly think it's lucky. Like, think about the number of people who have had an idea, right? And it's happened to us too. We take the Gripes podcast, which, like we've had
What do you
ideas
mean?
we've had ideas that don't pan out. But I'm lucky in that, like, take cricket, right? The fact that I can play cricket in the US is a huge privilege. I'm very lucky to be able to do that. That's things that bring me genuine joy, are just able to happen. And so, like, I thank, God every day for the ability to be able to do that and do those passion things. But, like, I would say it is the appreciation to find, and that's not, I'm not trying to make myself seem holier than thou. Like, I have a lot of frustration, a lot of stress in my life. But in terms of doing all these different niche things, it's the fact that I don't know what it is. I just find genuine joy in being able to do them. I have no purpose for them. And sometimes to the chagrin of my parents and other people who are like, oh, you should make something out of this. But sometimes I don't want to make anything out of it. I just want to play the instrument because I have a genuine joy of turning notes on the page into music. I like love playing as part of an ensemble. Like, that's just, I can't explain it. I just really enjoy it. And it sounds performative. I know it sounds fake, and some people will still think it sounds fake. But to me, it just comes from the fact that I have very niche, different, sometimes weird interests that I just have to express. And, like, even if that never leads anywhere, if those are able to happen along that sort of journey that has been set out for me, that is, I can't ask for much more than that.
Isn't it so true that you say people will get angry because they won't believe you, but they
Yeah,
won't?
they
So
won't.
many people can't accept the fact that there are people out there who are just so content with being in the moment, just being in the journey itself. There's not every day is you winning an award, you being glorified for your accomplishments. You just, like you said, turning the pages on a note, maybe making a little bit of progress on a piece than you did yesterday.
Yeah.
Those little things. It's the idea of being ever present. You're
Mhm.
not taking any little moment for granted, like you said. You see, in a spiritual sense, where I agree with it too. It's such a privilege that you should never take for granted. You should be grateful every day for everything that you have in your life because it can gone in a second,
Yes.
absolutely
Absolutely.
gone.
Absolutely.
And it's something that I still struggle with too. I think we all have our days where
Mhm.
we're just mad at the world sometimes. We're just like, why is this happening to me today? Why is everything going against me today? Why me? Why me? Why me?
Mhm.
And that's where I think we go wrong is we're looking at it through the wrong perspective is what's
Absolutely.
happening to me, but there's a whole universe out there where you're too focused on yourself and you can't say, okay, things might not be going the way that I want them to today, but that doesn't mean I have to let it affect everything else in my life. If I'm shut down and I try to go to that community today, maybe my demeanor is affecting somebody else in the community.
Absolutely.
Maybe me not being able to learn this piece of music in the long run won't be able to provide joy for somebody else because I'm
Yeah.
too self-centered today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
Right.
think we think very short term, especially more now than ever. Or I think the studies show our attention spans are 3 to 4 seconds. People are
Yeah.
very impatient with what they choose to do now.
And
And yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and yeah, sorry, no, I was just gonna say, like, to your point, I think that I'm guilty of it too. Like, and I've noticed this about you, just the point about demeanor specifically, I think resonates a lot because that's something that I've realized is that, like, a lot of people, I don't say this in a bad way, and I don't say this in like a self-aggrandizing way either. But I think a lot of people who know me for my personality, I think, realize that like my joy and my sort of like demeanor is a lot of who I am, like how I come across. Like I can't, I'm not very good at hiding my emotions. I don't know if you would agree with that, but
I completely agree, and in the best way possible, though.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like you when I am angry, you will know. And I think that like that genuinely upsets people to see me angry, to see me upset. And it's just like I try not to get into that space because then you feel like, oh my God, I'm upsetting other people too, right? It's
Hmm.
not just me. And like I don't want to be in the mentality of, oh, I'm here for other people. I should be allowed to feel what I'm feeling, of course. But at the same time, like you think about what you're being bothered by, and it takes you a few seconds to realize how small it is sometimes. And I'm glad that it does. These outbursts don't happen very often. Like I'm not angry very often, but when I am, it's very obvious. It's very palpable to see. And I think that part about demeanor is very true. So it's something that like when I do recognize it, like subconsciously, a lot of it has become subconscious, being able to recognize what I'm thankful for, being able to sort of have that baseline level of, even if I'm stressed, I know it's going to be okay, and that's
Yeah.
fine. And like that does carry a lot more than I give myself credit for sometimes. But when I do sort of like wear it on my sleeve, I do end up feeling guilty about that. And that's also something I need to change. But in general, like that point, is that like my demeanor does carry and does affect people around me. And that's something I'm realizing. And that's the same for other people too. When people are upset, I feel that. When you're upset, I feel that. So like people who are sort of empathetic will sort of let that carry their lives forward. But I think that I think that's so true. Like being thankful about the little things and sort of being intentional about being thankful is something that will minimize those episodes even more.
Yeah. And that's why I choose to surround myself with as many people that have high emotional intelligence, like yourself, where you're right, especially once you start to get into a more family setting, like heavily relationship based. If
Mhm.
you're showing your emotions, anger, sadness specifically, um, and you're letting that affect relationships externally, you feel that sense of guilt internally that I'm breaking this shell. I should be suppressing my emotions is the old rhetoric as
Mhm.
to what it used to be, but I think now more than ever it's being normalized to wear your emotions on your sleeve. Let
Yeah.
people in to see how you're feeling so they can help you and let you know that you're not alone in your thinking. We all get angry. We all have bouts of sadness, but
Mhm.
coming together, working together, understanding each other is the way to bring you back down to that even level and be like, okay, I know it is all going to be okay because
Absolutely.
someone else understands me. I don't have to go through this by my own.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, like I've been privileged to have like sort of realized that and surround myself with people lately in my life, like yourself included, people at med school who like for one, like I always had this underlying thought of I alone am responsible for my happiness. And while I still think that's largely true, I've been privileged to have people like you who like sometimes it surprises me that I can be upset around people that, oh my God, like it's okay. Like I don't have to feel guilty when I'm angry, because people who are genuinely concerned about you, and that's how you know, right? They won't make you feel bad about it. And that's something that like more and more I hope to continue surrounding myself with people like that, because that's the only way we're going to move forward and derive genuine joy in our lives when we're living life steadily with families and stuff way down the road.
Do you associate happiness with purpose?
Oh, that's a tough one. Yes, definitely. I think that not always consciously. I think that a lot of times you do that subconsciously. But for me personally, absolutely. Yeah, I would say that like, and purpose in different forms. I think that you have your sort of overall overarching purpose in your life. And, I'll be honest, like, I don't necessarily know or I can't fully verbalize what that is yet. I'm still in my early 20s. Like I have a lot to live. I think it would be silly if I knew exactly the way my life was going to look. But I know that there is a purpose. But even in the small scale things, something as small as playing a game of cricket, right? It's goal oriented. There's a purpose there. And I think that having that sense of, oh my God, this is what I'm going for and being able to achieve that derives a lot of my happiness. But I do think there's a double-edged sword there. And I think that I have a feeling you'll get guilty of this too, because you and I think similarly a lot of times. But people who are hard on themselves a lot, like I am for sure, and I think
Same.
that you have moments of that too. We have high standards for ourselves, and therefore we're hard on ourselves, and that's very true of everybody I go to med school with. Everybody's hard on themselves, right? But for when that happens, the double edged sword is that you set your purpose sometimes way too high, which means that you're setting yourself up sometimes to fail. And sometimes for me, like in a way, that's I need that because I need that constant drive. But for I've seen a lot of people just in general, like even for me, there are moments when I set it way too high and I end up cracking. So that's the sort of double-edged sword of that, is like purpose is very, very important, but when you're intentional about setting that purpose, make sure you know your limits too.
So you think purpose is self-determined, not predetermined?
I think it's a combination.
Okay.
I think that for certain things, there's many purposes. Is my point. I think that like there's your like again being a spiritual guy, your purpose is predetermined. Like
Hmm.
on some level, like whatever happens, I'm very secure knowing that God will take care of me somehow. And if I'm wrong, then that is the purpose that's been set out. But I think there's that, like just sort of overall life. But you are a being who has thoughts, feelings, motivations, drives, and I firmly believe that on the small scale there's a lot of thing that is self-driven, like how you achieve each aspect of that overarching purpose is on you. I firmly believe that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I love trying to ask as many people that type of question. I haven't gotten to ask it enough. That one of the main questions I want to focus around on any interview that I do is I never try to force people to see purpose the same way that I do because it's so individualized
Of course.
completely. Whether you choose to be spiritual or not, whether you choose to believe in something external, whether you think it comes from internal, it's such an individualized question that it's so fascinating to me because I think once you understand how someone identifies purpose, you understand better how they think and you
Yeah.
understand the person better. So knowing that that's how you perceive purpose, everything makes sense as to what you're saying. You want to try all these things and you can set the bar for yourself based on where you are currently in your life. If you think you need to take a step back, you take a step back. If you feel like you need to advance yourself, you go forward.
Yeah.
One aspect of the double edged sword that I completely agree with because I am equally as hard on myself as you are. Do you ever feel yourself when you're cracking? Do you ever view it as regretful? So I'll give you an example.
Mhm.
Going through school, high school, I did not nearly work as hard as I did in college. I worked very hard to get to where I was in college, do my parents proud, first and foremost. That was my main objective. They were supporting me to get to school. They supported me through school. I wanted to return on their investment. Get through school. Now I'm in this position. I'm not currently in grad school, so my GPA doesn't matter as much as it would to you who went to med school afterwards. Now it's more even playing field and it's based on how you work in the environment, how well you work with others. And I don't necessarily regret how hard I worked in school. I just question if maybe I should have toned it down a little bit. Maybe
Yeah.
done like you talked about, experimented in other avenues, try to meet new people, join more communities as opposed to being so focused on the
Mhm.
studies. Do you ever see that in yourself?
Absolutely. And I would say sometimes I like feel a little bit more guilty than I really should about not necessarily living my life, quote unquote, in college. Like, I didn't drink all through college. I didn't really get into any relationships, anything like that. Like, I had fun. I had a good time, but my first and foremost priority was always school. And one of my best friends at school, he always like, and I still, I used to give him shit for it, partly because I was jealous, and partly because I just didn't see myself being able to live life that way. But he outperformed me, GPA wise, academics wise, just in general. But would always would again, I don't necessarily know because I didn't study with him all the time, but he would live life a lot more than I did. He would go out more. He would start studying later than I did. He um, would always sort of find the path of least resistance to try and get things done. He was very efficient. He was much more efficient than me, not to say. And sometimes that did bother me. Like, he's still one of my closest friends. I love him, but like, it was something that, and I've spoken to him about this too multiple times. His name is JT, if he's going to listen to this, but he knows that, like, and that's something that I always look back and I regret. And he would tell me too, like, you don't need to go so hard, you don't need to. And looking back, I agree with him. But I never really felt that I would change a thing. Like, on one hand, yes, maybe I could have lived life more, but on the other hand, like, I'm not. I didn't do. I wasn't a different person back then. I wasn't someone who I wasn't in control of myself. I did all that fully willingly. And I never want to lose that focus. Like, not getting into relationships, for example, is not something that I'm like I regret. I fully take responsibility for it. And in a way, like, part of it was just I never saw the right time for it. But at the same time, like, I would say it's part regret, but it's also part like realizing and taking comfort in the fact that, like, I accomplished so much because I was like that. On some level, having that sort of third, fourth layer of comfort, of security in my academics rather than going out or socializing, sometimes I need that. I'm realizing that now. Like, I need to have multiple passes at material. I need to work at it again and again. Even if it means that, like, I understand it on the first or second try, I would much rather be safe than sorry. So yeah, do I look back a little bit and with the sense of like, yes, I could have toned it down, but at the same time, I'm realizing I'm not necessarily going to change that, nor do I want to change that. Like, I'm getting better at. I've definitely looking now, like, I'm much more balanced in life than I was back in college. 100%. Eating better, socializing better, able to manage my time better. But at the same time, like, I'm sure when I look back and like, oh, I didn't need to work as so hard. That feeling is going to diminish. I feel like, because I genuinely believe that I am this way because I want to be, and I wouldn't do what I'm doing if I didn't want to.
Yeah, I never look at regret as actions that took place in the past that I wish I changed. I look at regret as actions that I actively thought about and never took action.
Yes,
Those will always be regrets in my mind. I have a
absolutely.
couple. Uh, we don't have to get into it right now. It's not like devastating, like life changing. Oh my gosh,
Yeah, yeah,
no.
yeah.
But there's always those little things
No,
that
of course.
pop
Yeah.
up. Yeah,
Sorry. So I was gonna say, I think that, like, for me, it's more wistfulness rather than regret.
yeah,
Like, I think that's a better word for it. Probably looking back and be like, oh, maybe, but it's not. It's not like a deep regret. Like, another one of my very good friends in college, Rich, had this one line that still sticks with me. And he said, like, whatever it is, don't regret what you're doing. You can always have feedback for yourself. You can always be critical of yourself, but never regret anything that you do. Because if you regret what you're doing and you go and you choose a career path and you get 15, 20 years from now, that will just kill you. That'll be the worst thing you can possibly do, is to go into something that you regret. And I think that it is very deep seated to have that. And you genuinely have to, like, know that you're going down a wrong path. So I really don't think most people live life with regrets, but even for tiny things, like, if you, as you said, if you know what you're doing, you won't like, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it. And for some people, that affects them a lot more. And there are moments where I will, like, look back and rehash things that I maybe could have done differently, just in general. But on some level, I'm realizing more and more that, like, choice always comes first.
yeah,
At the end of the day, you choose to do something. So if you're going to choose something, being a reflective person, if you're going to regret it, maybe don't do it. So I would say, as time has gone on, I've definitely narrowed my choices, and I've definitely gotten better at doing things that I generally feel comfortable with overall. But yeah, there are moments that slip through the cracks, obviously.
yeah. And just building on top of that, I believe every action that we take in the past creates who we are now.
Yeah.
Like you said, you had to go through those experiences in your past to get to this place now where you feel more balanced than ever. You know what you value
Yeah.
because you learned what you don't.
Hmm.
And I think that's a necessary experience to growing up. And
Absolutely.
you provided the perfect segue for me because this is something I wanted to ask.
Hmm.
You had every choice in the world available to you, given your academic prowess, given your personality, given your skill sets,
Hmm.
to learn very quickly anything that you wanted to. And you chose medical school. Why? What is the promoting factor? You could have chosen anything in the world. Why choose this? Thank you so much for checking out the show. Part 2 with Sid will be up next week. We get further into why he chose med school, how it's going so far, and what goes into building professional and personal relationships, and just some good old fun. Once again, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you enjoy what you hear and you want to hear more, definitely leave a rating and follow along. It's the best way we can spread awareness about the show and help grow the community. If you're on YouTube, definitely hit that subscribe button, follow along, hit the notification bell, whatever the cool YouTubers say. I don't know. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all just taking the time out of your day to come listen to this amazing interview today because Sid has such amazing things to say. Once again, I'll catch you in the next one. Until next time, see you.